Good. All right, thank you very much, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. I would like to first acknowledge we are on the traditional territory of the Lheidli T'enneh First Nation. I would also like to thank the organizers for inviting me to moderate and also for ensuring that we have such a great turnout. It's really another banner year. Let's give them all a big round. All right, well, I'm excited because this morning we are bringing you a focus on forestry with the theme of charting forestry's future. And I think it's very timely that we discuss the unique issues, challenges, and opportunities facing the forest sector today and in the future. We have a terrific lineup of leadership with us today. Each of my colleagues will take a few minutes to share some thoughts with you. We'll have a few moderated questions, and then we will get to the pigeonhole. So to ensure we have lots of time for your questions, I'm going to provide really brief introductions. There are more detailed ones in the program that you can familiarize yourself with. So to start off, our first speaker will be Teegee, the Regional Chief of the BC Assembly of First Nations, first elected in October 2017, and he is also a member of the Takla Nation. Stephen Mackie is the Senior Vice President, Canadian Operations, Canadian Forest Products, whom we all know as CAN4, who's been with them over 10 years in senior leadership positions. Susan Yurkovich is the President and CEO of the BC Council of Forest Industries, appointed in June 2015, and she also serves as the President of the BC Lumber Trade Council, representing the interests of BC forestry on trade matters, including the Canada-US Softwood Lumber Agreement. And finally, John Allan, Deputy Minister of BC Ministry of Forests, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, and Rural Development. That's a tough one, John. And he was most recently appointed as Deputy Minister in September this year, but is known to many people here for his years working as a deputy in the BC government, as an advisor to government, and as a former CEO of Kofi. So can you give all of our panelists a warm welcome? Terry, please come to the podium.
Masai, Deneza, Tsekuza, Skyza, Samoyget, Simahanak, Simuget, Chiefs, registered chiefs, guests. First of all, I just want to acknowledge the Daket people of Lheidli T'enneh. And maybe we should all say that, because over the last couple of days, I've heard many iterations of that word. Lheidli T'enneh, Lheidli T'enneh. My name is Terry Teegee. My background is in forestry. I did attend these institutions here in Prince George at the College of New Caledonia. I did my forestry diploma and went on to the University of Northern British Columbia and got my degree in forestry, and I'm a recovering RPF, no longer a registered professional forester. So I was asked to talk about forestry today, and it'll be very similar to my discussion that I had last week at the Truck Loggers Association presentation. Just to give you a bit about my background at the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations, and really we're a society that represents the 203 First Nations in British Columbia to advocate on their behalf. In particular, their rights, their title, their interests, and any constructive arrangements that they have for many of our First Nations in British Columbia. British Columbia is quite unique. There are many arrangements. There has been historical treaties, modern treaties, and other constructive arrangements that have occurred over many decades to try to resolve this issue of the land question. And over those many years too, there has been many court cases, much of which came out on our side as British Columbia, as First Nations, winning these court cases to try to resolve the land issue. In particular, in regards to forestry, we got to be reminded over the last couple of weeks, we're talking about the issue of the Coastal GasLink pipeline. And much of the discussion came up was about the Delgamuukw stay-away court case that occurred, the decision that occurred 22 years ago. And the reason I have particular interest with Delgamuukw stay-away is that some of my hereditary chiefs in my family were a part of that court case. And that court case originated out of forestry development. The Chilcotin court case, the issues there originated because of forestry development. And much of British Columbia is forestry development. Probably the biggest footprint in development is forestry development. So there's a great interest from our people. The vast majority, 85% of our communities are in rural areas of British Columbia, and for that matter in Canada, 80 to 85%. So we're really the first ones that feel the effects of climate change. We're in the discussions of the rural-urban divide and those challenges, those barriers to economic development. And we're challenged with much of those issues that we're trying to solve. So one of the discussions I had last week with the Chilcotin people was about the Brittany Triangle in Honeycoteen, was the court decision on title. So what does that mean in a vacuum? That these lands have title. So no other laws can occur here, federal and provincial? I asked about that, and no, the First Nations goes, no, there was laws here before any colonization happened or occurred. There was Indigenous laws here. And those are the limits for the development of those lands. So we talked a bit with the Chilcotin people about how we're going to move forward and how is that going to be defined in terms of what they see in moving forward as First Nations people. So over the last couple of years, one of the other discussions that we were having in terms of development is the issues of the environmental assessment. And over the last year, the commitments from the NDP government as they came into power was the discussions with First Nations. And I'm glad to say we have come to a place where we're really seeing the acknowledgement of First Nations as decision makers. And that's really important. And I really believe that that's where forestry has to go in terms of forestry policy and the ability for First Nations to make decisions. We're seeing it across this country. Saskatchewan, the vast majority of the tenures are being held by First Nations. Northern Ontario, Tembec, and the First Nations groups have come together to really bring their, assets and those tenures together and start developing those lands in a way that's more manageable for First Nations to make decisions on their lands. So I think in light of the fact that we do need tenure reform, we do need forest policy that acknowledges the United Nations Declarations for the Rights of Indigenous People. These are, over the next while, these are the things that I'll be bringing up with Forestry Minister Donaldson. It's a part of the commitment document that was signed 4 years ago with the First Nations of British Columbia. Part of the commitment document, there are 3 priorities: environmental assessment, child welfare, and forestry. I'm glad to say that we have reached an agreement on environmental assessment policy, and now child welfare, and now the priority is forestry. So many issues over the next years, decades, talking about climate change and all the land use issues as we're getting down to less and less in terms of fiber. The old growth are becoming less and less, so the fiber basket is shrinking. So tough decisions to be made, and First Nations have to be a part of those decisions. And I see the red light is going, and I have to go. So thank you. I'm sure we could have had this discussion. This is one of the major topics we should have as a part of forestry reform. And we could have talked about this for 2-3 days to get all the minds together to talk about this really important issue. So thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to speak about forestry. Must say.
Thank you very much, Regional Chief.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. Before I begin, I would also like to acknowledge, like Sandy, that we are on the traditional territories of the Tsiglit Tenay, and I would also like to thank Chief Dominic Frederick for his leadership, his support, and our partnerships. Where's the clicker? There you go. Okay. Canfor remains a company headquartered in British Columbia and proudly operating in British Columbia, headquartered in Vancouver, BC, with the majority of our people employed here and the majority of our products produced in this province. About 65% of our lumber is manufactured here and 100% of our pulp and paper. We employ about 4,300 British Columbians directly, and over the last 10 years have invested more than $1.7 billion in our BC wood products and pulp business. BC is an integral part of our ability to continue to meet the growing needs of our customers around the world, and BC is uniquely positioned to serve growing demand in Asia. China now represents our second largest lumber market and our largest pulp market. We're excited about the strong and growing demand for our wood products around the world, as well as the increasing recognition of the environmental sustainability of those products and the green attributes. Forest products in BC, like many of the sectors represented here this morning, has to be competitive. We compete in a global industry, and we have to be competitive on a global marketplace. While we remain optimistic about the growing demand for the products around the globe, we also are concerned in the short term around some of the challenges that the industry faces. A couple of those challenges, two of the most significant ones that keep me up at night, are the availability of the fiber supply and the cost of that fiber. The total available fiber supply in BC is declining in a post-mountain pine beetle era and is further restricted by other limitations and constraints on the land base. In the wake of devastating and record-setting back-to-back wildfire seasons that impacted more than 2 million hectares, other emerging issues that impact forest health like spruce bark beetle, as well as challenges like species at risk legislation that will further constrain the fiber supply that our industry depends on. All of these factors impacting BC's competitiveness are challenging. None of them can be resolved easily, and none of them can be resolved by any one group alone. Success in the future will take continued collaboration across companies, industry, all levels of government, Indigenous nations, and communities to ensure the continued viability of the sector. As an integrated forest products company, we believe that we're well positioned to maximize the value of the fiber that we utilize in our businesses. We produce lumber, pulp, paper, pellets, and green energy, and the high quality fiber that we depend on is in short supply and it's expensive. We need to ensure that we utilize 100% of the fiber and the logs that are delivered into our manufacturing facilities, and we need to ensure that we produce high quality products that are in demand and meet our customers' needs. We need to develop additional and new markets. We need to develop new and higher value products that will shift us away from commodity markets to enhance value to the resource. Maximizing value also means providing sustainable jobs in communities and providing sustainable support for the Indigenous nations on whose land we operate. As a resource-based company operating in British Columbia, we recognize the importance of working in partnership with Indigenous nations in the communities where we operate. We engage with approximately 40 nations across BC, and over the years we've invested time to develop trust and relationships and build prosperous partnerships with the Indigenous nations that live in the areas that we work. While we've made some progress and we have some success stories, we've been part of building some successful partnerships, we have also faltered, and we recognize that there is much more to do in this regard. We believe that continued success in the future will be directly tied to our ability to develop mutually beneficial, meaningful relationships that enhance Indigenous nations' participation in the forest economy. Innovating for the future. A core component of our success is innovation, and we believe it'll be a critical part of charting forestry's future. Can we just start the video, if you guys? This should be a short video here. Given the fiber supply constraints that we see in the area and that we talked about earlier, we've been working on some unique methods and innovative methods to supplement and enhance our fiber supply. One technique that you can see here in the video that we're currently piloting in the Prince George TSA is a commercial thinning project, which is focused on removing a portion of the stand to allow the remaining stand to be more productive, have greater access to more sunlight, water, and nutrients, which enhances the overall growth rates and productivity of the stand in total. Although it's early days yet, we're quite excited about this opportunity, and when we look at the PGTSA alone of the stands in the appropriate age class, this could create a supply of potentially up to another 1 million cubic meters beyond what we're currently accessing. We're also pleased to be a member of the BC Digital Supercluster, which some of you may have heard about earlier this week in one of the keynote addresses, which is a consortium of companies focused on innovation and technology to enhance our supply chain processes. Our involvement in the project, in collaboration with other forest products participants, is focused on digitally transforming and modernizing the timber harvesting supply chain to enhance our ability to efficiently meet global demand. On the pulp side of our business, we're working to develop a disruptive technology to economically produce low-carbon biocrude from wood biomass. Some of you may have heard Martin Pudlis, our Vice President of Pulp Operations, speak about this at a previous conference. The technology replaces or it intends to replicate the geological process that produces conventional crude oil and would be complementary to our pulp processes. The biocrude can be used by the petrochemical sector to incorporate it into their products. We've had early interest from Husky, and we continue to work closely with the refinery right here in Prince George. On the solid wood side, we're seeing tremendous growth in mass timber and mid-rise and tall wood construction, which are creating new and exciting uses for wood. Many of you may be familiar with the Brock Commons building that was constructed at UBC, which was the largest tall wood building at the time of construction at 18 stories. It's currently being replaced as the tallest one in the world by one that is under construction in Norway. And Sumitomo Corporation in Japan has announced their plans to build a 70-story wood structure building over the next 20 years. Microsoft is building a new campus in the Silicon Valley, which is pictured in the bottom right-hand corner there, and it will be the largest mass timber building in North America. Canfor is proud to participate in this project by supplying all the lumber that will go into the cross-laminated timbers that will be featured throughout this campus, and that lumber is produced right here in BC. All of these projects demonstrate the growing opportunity for mass timber construction and the new and exciting uses for wood. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. Although we have some challenges in front of us, we do remain excited about the opportunity for the forest sector in BC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Over to you, Susan.
Thanks everybody for getting up early after last night's receptions. Thank you to the Clay-Kootenay people. I have a presentation that's going to pop up. Stephen talked a little bit about some of the operational issues, I suspect. Terry spoke about some of the opportunities we have with First Nations. John's going to talk about policy, so I thought I would pick something like markets and trade. That's something that we think about each and every day in our sector. And talk a little bit about what we're seeing right now. And if I'll just... So you all know that in this region and across the province, we produce a wide array. These are some of the products we produce, very high quality wood products. And those wood products are sent to more than 100 countries in the globe. you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about our key markets in Japan and China and, of course, the US. But we do ship to many other countries. Our products are in demand around the world. If we think about our export markets, this compares 2006 to 2017, which is the last year that we have complete data for. And you can see that what we've been doing is working to diversify our markets, particularly diversifying away from the US, where we experience significant trade barriers. China is up significantly, and that's up due to the work of Canada Wood, which is a highly successful partnership between the BC government, the government of Canada, and industry, where we have worked collectively to try and open up markets, build the market for our products in markets overseas, and particularly in Asia. Japan, a bit of a stable story, and of course we've got some other markets in South Korea, the EU, and others. I can't talk about markets without talking about last year. It was an extraordinary year, a very big wild ride in terms of pricing. We saw prices start to tick up as soon as we knew what we would be paying duties. Those duties got priced in to the market, and we had starting to a trajectory upwards. But what we never suspected is that we would have prices go up over. I think we peaked in June at about $655, and then of course we have had a precipitous slide. We had 21 weeks in a row of declining markets to October, where we bottomed out just under $300. I think it was about $298. That's extreme price volatility, and volatility in the market is not great. I mean, everybody loves high lumber prices, but it wasn't sustainable. And of course, when you get prices in that range, you see people starting to do things like substitute away from using wood. So what do we see for 2019 ahead? I want to talk a little bit about what we see in our key markets. I did put the slide up. We have a lot of products. For the purposes of my discussion today, I want to talk just a little bit about the lumber market. So starting with Japan. Japan is a major market for us. It's a very long-term market, 40-plus years. Kofi has had an office in Japan for for about 45 years now. It's a market that is mature, but it has a very changing demographic. And so what we've done is switched our strategy, where before, when early days we were moving into that market, it was really around housing construction, 2x4, post and beam. What we've really seen, what we're really pushing now is a shift to mid-rise, and there's good reasons for that. The population there is declining. It's also aging. So there is not as many housing starts, and there's more opportunity in buildings like long-term care facilities, elder homes, et cetera. And we see a huge opportunity for our construction, our know-how, our mid-rise buildings in that marketplace. Wood, importantly for Japan, addresses the seismic imperative. Of course, it's an earthquake active zone, and of course, those people that are living in those places are looking for options that are going to help them in the situations where they have found themselves in many times over the last few years. And it's very much aligned with the culture of green building, which we're seeing develop very much so in Japan and also in China. I guess the big issue for us in that marketplace is there's a real push for the domestic industry to grow. There's a lot of fiber that's coming online from that was planted in the post-World War II environment, and it's coming to the age where it can be harvested. And there's very significant subsidies being offered to the domestic industry to build manufacturing facilities, and that's going to have an impact. It's going to increase the competition for our products, and so we are working with our partners to address that challenge. The U.S. remains our largest market for lumber, and the fact of the matter is they need our lumber. Domestic consumption is much higher than domestic production. We don't have the 2018 numbers because, of course, all of the data for 2018 has been stalled because the government is shut down. But in 2017, they consumed in the U.S. about 48 billion board feet of lumber, and they produced about 34 billion board feet. That 14 billion board feet gap is largely filled by Canadian producers. And that situation is going to continue. And it's going to continue because we are seeing, while slow, moderate, continual uptick in housing demand. I expect that 2018 will end in about 1.26 or 1.28 million housing starts. But we also see very strong growth in the repair and remodeling sector. And while everybody focuses on housing starts, actually the repair and remodeling sector is actually the largest sector for our product. And so we see strong growth, people investing in their homes. The average age of a home in the US is 40 years old, so people are making the decision to upgrade. And so we think we will see reasonable demand fundamentals as we move forward. The things that give us some uncertainty are, of course, interest rates. They were ticking up. That was creating a housing affordability challenge for folks in the US. And of course, there's just tremendous uncertainty in the US with all of the political situation. And so that can have a potential impact. And of course, we have lumber tariffs at 20.23% on average, and we will continue to be paying those this year. China is our second largest market. Our focus in China is really in three areas: wooden manufacturing, industrialized construction, and resorts and institutions. Wooden manufacturing is moving up the value chain. Industrialized construction is what Stephen was talking about, building. It's the Lego block installation of buildings where you are building mass timber constructs off-site and taking them in there and assembling them. And then resorts and institutions. By 2050, they expect to have 500 million people over the age of 65. There's a very big push on green building. There's a very big push on building homes for the aged, and so we see lots of opportunity there. And of course, FII, Canada Wood, and the industry are pursuing those. I guess the big challenge for us is this. Our two largest markets are facing considerable challenges. Obviously, softwood lumber and lumber trade in the US and the growing uncertainty, and then of course of late, the instability with respect to China. And so I just would leave you with this slide. We are an export nation, we are an export province, we are an export industry, and we will continue to be so, and so we need to address the challenges that we have on that. But we also have a real opportunity here at home. This province has been a leader on green building, on tall wood buildings. This province and this region and this city have really been catalysts in getting people to build mid-rise and wood. And we can't forget that we have a wood first policy, which is terrific, and we appreciate that the government is supporting us in that way. But we've got lots of opportunity here at home, and so we can't forget about that market. I'll look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, John, you're up.
Good morning, everybody. I'd first like to acknowledge we're on the traditional territory of the Tene, and also acknowledge the conference organizers for a great conference. The crowds have been fantastic, speakers have been great, and good job, everybody. I've done my share of conference organizations and organizing, and I know how much work it is. It's a huge amount of work. So, as Sandy mentioned, I'm newly minted Deputy Minister of Forests, and frankly, this is my first speaking engagement since I joined government again. I was the deputy many years ago and retired. And I must say it's great to be back in Prince George speaking in this capacity. It's great to see old friends, colleagues, familiar faces, and I'm committed to my task at hand, which is to bring about revitalization on both the coast and interior, broadly speaking across the sector, not just the industry. And I want to share with you what happened on the coast. The Premier made a big announcement last week at the Truck Loggers Convention, and maybe some ideas from there will filter over to the interior. Those of you who heard his speech at lunchtime yesterday will know he talked about an interior process, no details. We haven't worked out any details, but let's start with the coast, and that'll give you a sense of what we did and how we did it on the coast. So, for slide one, please. Oh, I'm doing this, sorry. What am I doing?
Just this
The
little
clicker.
one, yeah.
I'm not a high-tech guy, as you can tell. Top button. Sandy, help.
This one, green guy.
Thank you.
There you go. You're set.
I'm embarrassed already. So on the coast, we had a process. So in June, we got together about 45 different coastal representatives across the sector, broadly defined. So we had unions there, solid wood, pulp and paper. We had industry there, solid wood, pulp and paper. We had contractors, First Nations, value-added, private managed forest land reps, community forest reps, and on and on. We had a presentation from Don Wright, the Premier's Deputy Minister, on what the government thought the ills were on the coast, what plagued the coast economics. And roughly, these are the items we covered off in the presentation. Tenure and concentration had increased to where one licensee, if you ignore volumes held by BCTS and woodlots and community forests, had gone from 28% of the replaceable AAC in 2003 to 55% in 2017. So more than half the public wood and AAC public crown land was held by one licensee. That's basically because there was no ability of government to manage takeovers, consolidations, mergers, and at the time, various ministers of the Crown thought that the way to solve the coast's economic problems was to have a few big companies. There was an erosion of social license, public trust, and for forest activities, and that reflected, that comment reflected comments we'd heard to UBCM in the fall and over the sort of generally meetings with communities where they felt that the industry was losing its contact with them. A lack of First Nations participation across the forest sector, lack of investment in second growth milling capacity. This one is very important, rising levels of waste left in the bush, where the waste levels had gone up dramatically since 2003 to where today we had something like over 2 million meters of waste left behind. And I started on a project for the government as a consultant early last year because the pulp mills were running out of pulp logs and waste that they consume in the mills, resulting in shutdowns and layoffs, curtailments. And it was because they couldn't get enough fiber. But of course, the industry would say, well, you're not paying enough. So that leads to another comment I'll make just about the coast in a minute. Failure to harvest the forest profile. There was a heavy dependence on cedar. Susan showed you the tracking of lumber prices this year, and that was SPF, and you can imagine what cedar prices were like during that period of time. Log exports increased by 140% from 2003 to 2017, peaking out at something like 3 million meters of exports from public land, and of course, we don't have any control over private land, and that added another 3 million. So, responding to all these concerns and comments, next slide. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
What a comedian I am.
green button.
We laid out objectives for the coast forest sector, rebuild the solid wood and secondary industry to ensure more logs and fiber are processed in BC, improve the harvest performance, maintain credible auction system, increase First Nation participation in the sector, restore the social license public trust. And we had various mechanisms we were suggesting we would pursue to do that. So this was in June, as I said, and over the summer, again, I was in contract. I engaged with everybody in the room and then some others on what their ideas were for us to help define these objectives more appropriately, and furthermore, what policy changes would they recommend for us to meet these objectives. We had a tremendous round of sessions and meetings. Everybody pitched in, and I must congratulate Susan on behalf of her organization and her members on the coast for a terrific job. Everybody was very responsive, and I had over 100 meetings and sessions, engagements with the sector over the 2 months. And then we met again in September to define what direction we were going to take. The coast engagement was announced last week by the Premier at the truck loggers, as I said. Basically, we're going to go to various policy changes to encourage more waste to come out of the bush, to reduce log exports, to increase First Nation participation. I won't go into detail because we'd be here all day on it. You can check our website for the details. But I do want to say one thing. The engagement with First Nations industry and labor is ongoing. We made this announcement, but generally it was important to note in the announcement that these changes will be rolled out gradually over time. We will continue to work with impact analysis to make sure we've got it right. The Premier made a point of saying he didn't want unintended consequences, and nor do we in the government, because I wouldn't be here too much longer if we did. We've got to get this right, but it's not that we're trying to add cost industry. Everybody's going to have to play in this game somewhat. And that leads to my comment, which I mentioned earlier, that I would raise later. I found in my engagement over the summer, the business climate on the coast was very negative. And I think we need to put policy changes in place along with a conversation with everybody who's in this sector to improve the business climate on the coast. When fiber is in short supply, and this is very much true in the interior, it becomes a bit of a survival game. And if you don't have fiber, you're not going to survive. As Stephen laid out conditions for competitiveness, and I couldn't disagree with any of them, but he talked about fiber, availability, security of fiber, cost of fiber, access to fiber. And that is the one issue that we've got to focus on. And if you don't have fiber, you're going to die in this industry. And I don't want to be dramatic and say that, but when the AAC in the interior is coming down and the coast AAC is pretty much flat, and there's great demands for fiber, we've got to figure a way for the industry to work together in a better business arrangement. We can't go on fighting each other for survival. We all need each other, if you think about it. This is a truly integrated business. You need contractors, you need pulp mills, you need sawmills. The waste from the sawmills has to go to the pulp mills. Susan's right, we need markets, but internally here in BC, we need a healthier conversation around forests in terms of the business opportunities. We need to work together in a better way. And that's the theme I would like to bring to the interior when we get going on interior process. We haven't put pen to paper yet. I have to be open and transparent here. That's my nature. I think, however, we're starting to think about the ideas, and I'm picking up some ideas here at the forum. Certainly, the issues around declining timber supply are huge. Mill closures, we've seen a number of curtailments lately in order to get that price back up a wee bit that Susan referred to. We need a corresponding need to add more value. I couldn't agree with Stephen's comment about that more so than what he was saying. We need to add more value. We can't keep on a survival course of just pumping out this spaghetti, basically. The critical importance of reducing wildfires, and of course, President Trump's views notwithstanding, climate change is changing the weather, and of course, we've had two massively bad years of wildfires, and we are a long time ago getting ready for this year, just in the event that we have another bad year. We're probably in a bit of a drought cycle right now, so we need to get ready and we need to change and adapt. We had a report produced by George, the Abbott-Chapman report. We're addressing those issues and changing the way we manage fire and fight fire on an ongoing basis. And of course, we need to worry about community resiliency. That's where it's at. Communities are worried about their futures, jobs in the communities, the economics of the community. I had a terrific meeting yesterday with folks from the Peace River area, mayors, representatives of the regional district on what's called the caribou issue. And those of you who are here from that part of the world will know what I'm talking about. And it was a very good meeting where we indicated we were ready to come and meet with the communities. So, in closing, I came back to government willingly. I wasn't dragooned. There was no press gang sent out to take me out of the pub and drag me onto a sailing ship. But it's an interesting time. You've got a premier who's interested in the sector. You've got a deputy premier who's a former deputy minister. a former colleague of mine in the private sector. I used to hire him on contract at the BC Lumber Trade Council, and he has a massive interest in forestry. So I say to my staff, this is the time to make change. This is the part of the lichen cycle where you've got to make a difference. This is the year we make a difference, and I want to engage with everybody who's got an interest in the sector. I think those of you who know me know I'm available, I'm accessible, I try and lead. But having said that, I've got a huge ministry to run. I have 10 assistant deputy ministers and 1 associate deputy. It's a complex ministry, it's big, but I think I'm up to the task. But I can't do it myself. So we're going to lead by the team approach internally to the government, and we're going to work with everybody here who has an interest, whether it's First Nations, solid wood, pulp and paper, contractors, you name it. We will engage with you on the interior process. I know I've talked about the coast, but let's face it, we're in Prince George. We're a long way from the coast. So more to come later on, but we will engage across the sector as broadly as we can, and I look forward to working with all of you here today. Thank you very much.
Take this home, maybe.
All right, thank you so much to all our panelists. I think that was a terrific overview. I think you got kind of the broad spectrum of a variety of issues and a variety of opportunities, both from the private sector, from Indigenous people, and also from the government side. So I think we're well set up to move into the panel discussion. I'm going to take the liberty of having a few moderated panel questions, and then we will turn to the pigeonhole, wow, which is already getting very active, and for which I will need my glasses, I can tell. Okay, yeah, next year my request would be, is there any way the pigeonhole could be a bit bigger? All right, for all of us up here who need glasses. Okay, I'm gonna, because there's so many issues, I mean, it's overwhelming in an industry that's been a cornerstone in British Columbia for over 100 years. We're facing so many issues as we're hitting 2019. So maybe I will take the liberty and ask each of our panelists maybe to sum up from your perspective. If there's 1 or 2 things that you would say would make the difference to the success for the industry going forward, what would that be? And I'm going to pick the lovely lady down on the 3rd seat. Susan?
Thanks. Well, what is most critical, I think, from our perspective is access to fiber at a reasonable cost, the stuff that Stephen was talking about. And the second thing would be access to markets. Those 2 things are critical.
Thank you. Stephen, do you want to add anything?
Just that I would echo that for sure for Susan, obviously, and John referenced it. An ability to have certainty of access to fiber, recognizing the challenges that are in front of us in BC in the sector, but we need to know that we've got the fiber that all of our businesses rely on across this sector to facilitate continued investment in British Columbia, to create jobs, to support communities, to support Indigenous nations across the province. So there's a number of challenges to sort out there, so that's the biggest issue for us. And the only one that I would agree with, access to market, maybe a different one that I would also add, is access to people. Having the talent and the folks that we need in this industry to allow us to achieve our objectives, to innovate, to change what we're doing, to develop new products, new markets, that takes people to be successful and achieve our goals.
Thank you. Regional Chief, some thoughts?
Yeah, I think for First Nations, it's these arrangements with companies and taking the lead in those arrangements. And one of the things that companies such as Canfor and West Fraser's, these companies need is access to predictable tenure and fiber basket. And part of the issue there is for First Nations is those tenures are held by First Nations, and perhaps some of those tenures should be jointly held by First Nations in those territories. And I think really I guess it's the the changing business model for industry has to include First Nations. And I think we're no longer looking at just holding on non-replaceable forest licenses short term. We want to be equity shareholders. We want skin in the game. We want to be managers on the land, hold vast areas of tenure. And I think that's the way it has to change. And we're seeing this shrinking fiber basket, especially here in the Prince George Timber Supply area, which I participated in the timber supply review. And the reality is in Prince George, Fort St. James, Vanderif, is that 2 or 3 of these conversion plants of these mills are going to have to shut down. So how does that affect, this urban and rural divide? And that's just the reality. We're going from 11, 12 million, cubic meters to 8, 6, 7, and that's just the reality. There's just not enough fiber out there. So it's a very dynamic, changing world we're living in, and you put on this different political climate and climate change, if you will, and then these decisions have to be made, and it's not going to be easy.
So in the it's not so easy category, John, I'm going to turn to you. And just, given the challenges, where can forest policy really help with, and I'm going to use the word, I said I wouldn't, but I have to, competitiveness? How can forest policy really help support us as we're facing increasing pressure on our competitiveness?
Great question, and I tried to answer it in my opening remarks to preempt Sandy asking me the question directly. I think the policy agenda is, well, we all know this, it's critical. It'll impact business, it'll impact communities, impact First Nations, impact everybody who's got an interest or a share in the sector. However, if we don't have a more appropriate business climate across the sector, if we keep eating each other's lunch, nobody is going to survive that. The big will get bigger, the small will get smaller. So my answer to competitiveness back here at home is to work together to figure out what will work for everybody. Some people will have to do with less. In a declining timber supply, you're not going to get more. The distribution of tenure might change in favor of First Nations, and probably will. But in a declining timber supply market, we've got to have a rational policy that's adaptive. It's not a one-size-fits-all policy, and it's got to recognize that everybody in the sector needs to understand that together you can survive, but if you keep fighting each other, and then you could say it's competitive, but I won't go into detail about some of the details I've become aware of and what goes on in the sector. We can't have a strategy where we end up with 4 big mills, for example. We need an approach where we have an honest and open, transparent conversation to understand each other's requirements and needs. And I started that process on the coast last year, just with the pulp mills and the sawmills in terms of getting more fiber into the pulp mills. And there's a lot you can do to improve the business climate just by knowing each other's business needs. That used to happen in the old days when we had vertically integrated companies, when companies in the coast, for example, owned sawmills and pulp mills together. That's still the case in the interior somewhat, but it's a different set of conditions in the interior. But I'm pledging today to have that conversation with everybody who's got an interest in the sector so that we can improve competitiveness through that improved business climate along with the appropriate policy changes.
So maybe I'll put you on the spot, Stephen. I know there's going to be lots of conversation going forward, but any thoughts for John and for the audience around, how we might address, in particular, high log costs, better utilization of the full log?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a complex problem, as John notes, for sure. And I mean, as I think I tried to reference in my opening remarks, it's the forest sector is a global industry, and we operate in other jurisdictions outside of BC, so we're familiar with the cost structures effectively globally here soon with our recent move into Europe. So, when we look at our ability to serve the needs and the growing demand of customers around the globe out of British Columbia, we need to be able to do that economically. The challenges are immense, and Terry referenced them, John has referenced them. The solutions won't come easy. They're going to take open communication and collaboration and working together, as John talks about. I think that enhancing our ability to utilize the fiber, John referenced vertically integrated companies, and creating more and new higher value products out of that scarce resource and that fiber is part of it. Making sure that it's economically viable and we've got certainty and security of regular access to it, and that the folks that own that resource are participating in that forest economy. And Terry touched on that as well. I think, probably additionally, the only other piece that I would add is just having that certainty creates and allows investment. We have invested in the province, and like other companies in the sector, predicated on the security and certainty of having that tenure. And it makes it challenging to continue to make those investments in a capital-intensive business if you don't have that. Some of that fiber, that is managed by other parts and let out to available competition by the province, that needs to come to market so that we have access to it, because it just exacerbates the cost structure if it isn't there.
So I think, Terry, that's a good segue just to kind of ask you around certainty of land base. I'd be interested, and maybe I'll couple it with one of the pigeonhole questions. What have you seen as being some of the real success stories out there around forestry and First Nations partnership to help with this? And then, let's tackle on the end of that, what do you see the future looking like in terms of tenure ownership, given where we're at in reconciliation?
Yeah, the term reconciliation, British Columbia is quite a unique region. We have the federal government's commitments, and we also have the provincial government's commitments to really implement what reconciliation means to Indigenous peoples. So we're quite fortunate. We've seen it in our involvement in the development of new environmental assessment legislation, and also the commitment to develop child welfare legislation. But in terms of forestry, I think, it's not only incumbent of the provincial government to initiate this initiative that is reconciliation. It's also incumbent upon companies to do their own work. And I've seen different arrangements between companies and First Nations to create that, what I talked about early on, that certainty, that predictability of fiber, and those arrangements to management on the land, and to understand First Nations concerns on the land, and to really create this space so you have open dialogue about what concerns First Nations. And First Nations too, in British Columbia, we're in a place where there's unceded territory, where much of this litigation occurred, the Delgamuukw Stay-Away, the Chilcotin court case. So those First Nations are really trying to define what that means to their people. And whether it's their traditional governance or their say in terms of going back to the community, whatever, what is our vision? We have a responsibility too. And I really appreciate my community, Tackle Lake First Nations, our chiefs, and hereditary chiefs, and our chief and council that came together and created this space for our people to talk about the vision of the future of Tackle. And much of what we talked about was to have more management and decisions on the land. And we're creating that with negotiations with Canfor, that is a big operator in our territory. And they're really defining and setting that space for themselves, or ourselves as Tackle Lake, how we're seeing going forward, and being a part of the economy. And I don't know if you were here yesterday, and we're talking about unlocking Indigenous potential with Roberta Jameson, Corey Wilson, J.P. Gladue, and what, and I don't know if Corey's here, but what she stated yesterday, and they were talking about education of our people in those areas, and we were talking about capacity, and filling those places, not just simply, working in low-level jobs in a mill or custodial positions, and it's my predecessor, Jody Wilson-Raybould, who used to hold this position as regional chief, used to be our attorney general. And I think, that example really demonstrates that First Nations can take these positions in high levels of government and in high levels of companies to the next generation. We didn't have that when I was growing up. I haven't seen that, where some of these very high level, the top 2-3 positions in Canada was held by an Indigenous person and a woman. And it shows a good example to our Indigenous youth and our women that this can happen. And I think that's a part of reconciliation, that these places can be filled by Indigenous people and in higher levels of management and in higher levels of government. And really, I think that's, as a part of reconciliation, that's where we need to go. So.
Thank you for that. I had a chief ask me a couple of months ago, Sandy, how do I get one of my people to have your job? So, mentorship and leadership is really essential. They're getting so many votes, I have to go to professional reliance, and I think I'm gonna start with Susan, because Kofi has really led on this file, has really worked closely with the government. Question is, the Professional Reliance Initiative will bring changes to the roles and responsibilities of professionals. What do you see as the major changes, and how will it impact business operations? And I think everyone who's in forestry knows that, the devil's in the details and we have a long way to go, but Susan, why don't I let you tackle that question?
Sure, I'll try. I was looking over at John.
We might let him do a follow-up.
So the Professional Reliance Review that was led by the Environment Ministry took place over the last year or 13 months. We're all interested in really good government and really good regulation, and when the Professional Reliance Review started out, it was to make sure we have standardization, professional development requirements, like to make sure that the 5 associations that were the subject of the first review had some standardization. In my view, the review went far past that, and many of the recommendations, to Sandy's point, we don't actually know how they will land. A couple of them that there are a number of changes to the things that I just talked about. There's also, the legislation has the establishment of a regulator of regulators, which is fine, but this is a highly regulated industry, and we have had in our past situations where our industry was so burdened with regulatory, stacks and stacks of regulations to follow. You can turn yourself into a pretzel, and you don't necessarily get the outcomes you want, and it's very costly. So we are supportive of really good oversight, but we have to make sure that we do that in a way that's rigorous but efficient and cost-effective for industry. So we have the legislation that's out there, but there's a lot of other pieces of that review that are TBD, or to be determined. That process is going away. Many of them are going to land in John's ministry, changes that are anticipated, and we'll be tracking those. But our strong hope is that whatever comes out of that, it is rigorous but efficient, allows for timely approval processes, and make sure that we don't overly burden our industry with costs.
Right.
Because we have to compete, as everybody's talked about.
Hey, John, anything to add on that?
Well, the other issues that Susan referred to, the other recommendations that government didn't go through with legislation to cover off, Susan's right, there a lot of them are landed in my department. We will work through them all. We'll engage with the Professional Foresters Association on those, and anyone else who's got an interest. The government, I've never seen an issue that generated so much emotional debate as well as business and economic and professional debate as this one. It really touched a lot of people, and one way or the other. It's one where, frankly, I'm not paying a lot of attention to it right now because I'm waiting to hear what the staff are going to recommend by way of how we manage these other issues. But we will be back with them sooner or later. I think we can work our way through these issues and make sure that the business carries on a business-like basis. I don't see these changes getting in the way of the orderly course of business in the forest sector if they're managed carefully and properly.
Sandy, I know we're going to get the hook, but can I just add one point?
Please.
We have very professional foresters. We are blessed in this province with really highly skilled people. Foresters, some of them sitting on the stage and in other places, and they do an excellent job. There's always room for improvement, and we're 100% in that space. But we have highly talented professional foresters who are doing excellent work sustainably managing our forests. So I just want to give a little shout out to the foresters in the room.
Yeah, and all you young foresters who are out there, I mean, we need you. We
Yep.
need you in this sector. I've been told I have to wrap up. I want to tackle, just throw a little controversy in here, an issue near and dear to my heart, and that's the comments I've heard around need to improve social license. And of course, we always need to improve social license. We always need to be close to our communities, whether they're the municipal or the First Nations communities. But in my view, we have been working in forestry since time immemorial to really ensure that we do that well, and I think we do. So is there things we could do better? I'm maybe just going to toss it out. Couple of ideas, either things that you've found have been particularly helpful or areas that you think are worth exploring in the future. So I'm going to start with you, Stephen.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a good question. I think it's something that we always are focused on. How do we enhance our relationships with our communities? And it's something you can never do well enough, right? Our people that work in our operations, that work in the forestry activities, that support our manufacturing sites, they live in the rural communities. We operate in some parts of the province that are sometimes challenging. They're not always where everyone wants to live, but a lot of the folks that live and work in our business, they enjoy that rural life, they enjoy the recreation and other aspects that go with living in rural communities. And so we try to balance those needs along with our business needs and try to support multiple uses on the land base, support our folks engaging in those activities. I'm thinking, Sandy, it's hard not to think about right now with Susan's chart and the rapid decline in lumber prices. That's putting some pressure on our communities today. We've obviously, and we never like to do that, it impacts employees, our families, our communities when we take capacity reductions, and we've got to make sure that we're viable for the long term. So there is some hard decisions that have been faced by the industry today and that we've all talked about are coming. So we've got more work to do there.
Although you announced you're back up again.
We're back up again.
All right, Regional Chief, thoughts?
Well, the social license, especially in terms of First Nations and this era of reconciliation, and how do we really deal with these outstanding issues on the land question. I think, especially in the future of forestry, communities, small communities, First Nations communities, have to be really involved in terms of the decisions that are being made. And whether we like it or not, and we're talking about competitiveness, it's those companies that are innovative and are willing to go down that road with First Nations for their fiber security are the ones that are going to survive. And, like First Nations ownership, we, Takla, Glaston, and Nakazi own shares in Conifex and have some tenures with Conifex. But and we also have to consider the issue of competitiveness. Do we want just one ownership of Canfor, right? Like, that's a reality. Some of this is going to be consolidated, and we're living in a time of change. And that's really important in terms of the future of forestry. How are these decisions going to be made? And I think, you know, that's just a reality as the fire basket is shrinking and shrinking, and it's tough decisions that need to be made, and especially with forest policy change, doing more with what we have left. So what does that mean? So I think there needs to be more investment into research and development, and it shouldn't be just incumbent on companies to put that revenue forward. I think the Canadian government and provincial government need to come forward with more resourcing to look at research and development. What can we do with the fiber we have left? So if we're going to go down that road, that's what we need to do.
I couldn't agree with you more. Susan, what do you want to say to wrap things up?
I think I agree. I mean, we are completely linked to our communities, and we as a sector, we can't survive without strong leadership around our communities and our regional districts in the nations that we work with. And I feel really fortunate that we work with a lot of mayors, many, and regional district leadership, other community leaders that are, some of whom are in this room, and we will continue to do that. If any of you were at our COFI convention last year, when I started to hear this erosion of social license, public trust, I actually said, this doesn't feel like it resonates with me. So we actually went out and tested it. If any of you were at our COFI convention, you will have seen some of the results. We enjoy very good support in the province as a whole. Does that mean it's perfect? No. There's always room for improvement. There's always things that go wrong that can be done better. And I'm with Stephen. It's a continual thing. And as we continue to get better and we integrate more people into our sector, more nations, we want more participation in our sector. We have 5,300 Indigenous folks who are directly employed in our sector right now. We want that number to grow. We want partnerships with communities. We want to be able to continue to invest. And so that's a work in progress, but we come to it from a very strong base, in my view. And you know, from the research that we have done all over the province, we enjoy very good support, but we can always do better, and we will do that.
Thanks. John, last comment?
Social license, in my view, was a policy of the government way back when we had a pertency. So you had tenure, you had a mill, and your requirements in the tenure documents were to be operating that mill pertinent or near the tenure. Those requirements were eliminated in 2003, and since then, I think it's fair to say that post-Beetle, with declining timber supply, community concerns have increased dramatically about their futures. And it's not just the declining timber supply, it's the wildfire situation we've had in the last 2 years. Is this the new normal? I hate that phrase, but we don't know yet, but it could be. So when we went to UBCM in September, we heard a lot of communities expressing concern about their futures. If we lose the mill, if we lose mills, we're going to lose jobs, housing prices will crash, the economy and the local community will wither. So in order to have a discussion about how you address that, you really get into what is the responsibility of government, industry, First Nations, labor, etc., the whole suite of players in the sector to correct that situation, to improve that situation. And right now, as I said earlier, there's a bit of a tension in the sector. It's driven by the fiber gold rush that's going on. And I think social license is a suite of tools you could have. It could be anywhere, and Susan mentioned some good ones, mentorship, training, employment. It's not just a check written to the local hockey rink. It's a suite of issues where the tenure holder takes some responsibility for responding to community needs, for responding to First Nation needs and requirements, and the laws of the land and government policy about giving First Nations, as Chief Teegee said, skin in the game. And it's going to take some time to reverse the trend in communities that fear for their futures. But again, it's part of that ongoing dialogue we need to start having about how to utilize the interior industry. So I don't have a magic answer of what we mean by social license, but I do know that the community interest, and it's more than just the community, it's more than the mayor and council, it's all the citizens of the community, it's the folks who work in the mills, it's First Nations. We need to have that discussion.
All right, that's great. Can everybody please join me in giving our panelists a big round?